the famous obelisk. Is that what you call it?
That's right, the obelisk.
The obelisk at Basket Range, which is just such a beautiful area here in the Adelaide Hills. And I've come up here to meet the great man, James Erskine, who is making some really interesting wines and has got a really fascinating approach to winemaking, and not only the wines but the context in which they're enjoyed. So we're currently enjoying some wines out of the barrel, which are about to be, soon to be bottled. So mate, tell us a little bit about what it is you're doing here in your shed.
Sure. We're pretty blessed to be able to have taken over the management of this shed, which was built in the 1860s from Basket Range sandstone. It used to be an apple packing shed, sort of derelict for 15 years, and to be able to bring something like that back to life means a lot to me and means a lot to the owners of the land. And I feel it's kind of the same when I'm working with my Grenache growers. Grenache is something in the Vale which is loved by many and harboured by many, but seen as a second-class citizen to Shiraz. When I used to be a restaurateur and writing wine lists, I didn't often stock too many Grenaches. I had some big cuddly wines for the winter times, but the wines weren't available from South Australia, which really reflected what Grenache meant to me. Some people call it the poor man's Pinot or Pinot of the South or something like this, but it's this, you're always going to have robust wines with Grenache, you're always going to have higher alcohol. It's a late ripener, that's just what you've got to work with. But the attention to actually how you manage your ferments and what your end goal is with the wine, which for us is drinkability, finesse, lightness, and sort of a beautiful aromatics. It's such an aromatic variety. Those wines weren't there. And the vineyards were excellently maintained, but the buyer's price wasn't so high. So I've been very, very lucky to step in at the right time when there's some fantastic, up to 1947 old blocks which have been BD farmed for at least 5 years, some of them longer, and to come in and just start playing as a small player, small buyer, to eventually taking over the management together with Fiona Wood, who's the viticulturist we work with for every single block. And the other classic is Shannon. Shannon had its heyday in the 70s and the 80s when my parents were avid university drinkers or whatever they were, plumbers. They were smashing Shannon. It was the drink of the day, as was Riesling. Shannon's gone today. It's so out of fashion. If you talk to any wine geek, the great Shannons of the Loire, the great Shannons of Franschhoek, these northern South Africa above Cape Town, they live forever. They're fantastic wines. So I guess what we're trying to do is work with heritage material to ensure that it's brought into the current, I suppose, paradigm of drinking. And if you're interested in natural wine, which for me I classify as wines which are produced without the addition of commercial yeast or acid or fining or filtration, they're fantastic because the pHs are naturally low. We do add sulphur to most of our wines. Because the pH is low enough, the sulphur is actually effective. It's a problem you have in some hotter climates with some varieties where the pH is too high. And we're just exploring and trying to find our own voice, but having a lot of fun at the same time.
Cool. You mentioned Grenache and Shannon as being the two varieties that you really focus on here. Your winemaking is very much done in the context of the culture in which you live, both in the vineyards here at home or nearby, and here where you make the wines, and in terms of how you share them with the public. Tell us a little bit about your sort of philosophy in terms of how that kind of combines, because I think it's a really natural approach to enjoying wines, but often wines can be sort of isolated from the context in which we enjoy them at tastings and that sort of thing.
So I'm a cook turned waiter turned sommelier, and travelled a lot and worked a lot throughout Europe and Asia and vintages in South Africa. So I've sort of travelled around and had a look at all sorts of different people's views. But I was a junkie from when I was about 18 for chasing down wines which express the place and the person. For me, the person is so important. And a lot of people talk about terroir as being the taste of a place. For me, terroir is far deeper and far inseparable from the culture from which it is involved. Grenache was planted for a certain reason in the Blewett Springs and Clarendon region. It was what was available, it was what grew well, it's what people understood, it's what people wanted to make port from back in the day, as with Shannon. You can't, and you know, the emotional turmoil that's gone into the farming. You can't separate this from the wine of the day. And you were asking me a little bit about the Hot 100 as well, which is a wine show which I'm coordinating together with the Adelaide Review, a pretty good rag here in Adelaide. And basically, for me, I've set up the structure of the show, which is a little bit different to traditional wine shows, because I didn't really get traditional wine shows. For me, rocking up in a white lab coat with a board, having zero context to judge the wines in other than being told that they're Rieslings and find the best one. As a judge, I find that a bit nervous. I get nervous and I feel uncomfortable and I feel sterile. And I think that makes me look for sterility in wine. Whereas for me, what's important is vitality, drinkability, how excited I get about that wine. And so I sat down and thought and spoke to many people about how do we create a structure which can promote that. And the easiest thing to do was to think about this idea of terroir, the taste of a wine, and the current wine styles and the classic wine styles as being inseparable from where they come. And what that means is you need to understand the food of the day, the art of the day, the politics of the day, the pressures from agricultural farming, etc. And so what I try to do when the judges come to our show is just immerse them, surround them in what I see as South Australian culture at its best. And that's some classic artists or tours of the back of house of the South Australian Museum. It's sort of irrelevant what we do, as long as the people who or institutions that the judges get to meet and surround themselves in are true to what they are, and they're not just fashionable copiers of someone else. They're actually someone who's gone right, and you can see straight away who's a market leader and who's a follower, and really work with people who stick and adhere to their dream. And the judges get it totally. We don't judge by variety, we judge by style and by feel and with music, and it's really just about finding those wines which are the most beautiful. And I think there's such a big paradigm shift in how wine is tasted and how wine is shared in South Australia. Look at the bursting of wine bars and the relaxation of wine laws. I mean, we were talking about this, you're from Queensland, it's such a different culture. Everyone's a wine geek here, if they like it or not, because they're just submersed in wine. And so we need to celebrate that, and we need to celebrate diversity. And so thank you for coming to see little guys like us who really, push a total different style of doing things. But doesn't mean I don't like what the big boys do. I've got lots of time for what they do. It's just diversity is the key.
Yeah. Look, it's fascinating to sort of taste through some of these wines and hear your sort of intention but behind them. Just quickly, we've got a blend here which is a Shiraz Grenache. Audrey, you mentioned, is it going to be released? Is it a new release?
It's a new release.
Under that Audrey label?
Under Jauma is our label for everything. Yep. James in the Catalan dialect. And Audrey is our daughter who's now 4 months old. So we needed to make a wine which would outsmart her brother's wine, Danby, who's 2.5. So Danby gets the Cab Mac fun spring release, and she gets this, what I think, superb, slightly more robust Clarendon Shiraz with a little bit of Grenache to make sure there's a bit of fun in there. So you should see that in Queensland, providing our distributors Bouchon enjoy the wine in April, May. Awesome. $35 on the shelf, and hopefully it'll be well drunk.
It will be, and it's. I guess these wines, based on the limited production levels, are not easy to find necessarily. But if you can get online, if you've got a website where you can access some information about where to buy these wines?
In the future, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, in the meantime, get in contact with James or myself somehow, because you've got to find these wines. They are just delicious. Grenache, perhaps like you haven't tasted before, and that's a really good thing. Some really exciting stuff happening, not only here in the hills and from McLaren Bar, where these wines come from, but look, all over the place. It's an exciting time to be drinking wines. Thanks for showing us around and
Pleasure.
Picking some of the good stuff out of the barrels for us.
It's all right. Enjoy your tour of South Australia.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
Cheers.